Hello, dear friends. Today we continue our acquaintance with the memoirs of Waffen SS Major General Kurt Meyer. Don't forget to rate the video and leave your opinion about this material. Well, let's begin. The position of the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, weakly held but defended by battle-hardened soldiers, was subjected to Russian artillery fire of all calibers at 5 o'clock in the morning on November 25th, and then attacked. The losses from this barrage were almost zero. Where there is nothing, nothing can be destroyed. But then my soldiers' blood almost froze in their veins. In the dim light of dawn, large masses of Russian infantry appeared, singing and shouting as they rushed to attack our positions. The front ranks joined hands, forming a continuous chain that marched across the ice in time with their wild singing. Our mortar shells made large holes in the ice, forcing the Soviet troops to break their chain. But the shells could not stop the mass that had set itself in motion, advancing on my comrades like a well-oiled machine. In the middle of the river, Soviet soldiers came under our fire and fell onto the ice like ripe wheat under a scythe. My soldiers lost faith in God and humanity when the advancing Russian soldiers attacked, climbing over the fallen and continuing their assault. The attack was led by 2 rifle divisions and 1 cavalry division. 3 newly formed divisions attacked several hundred men spread out over 8,000 meters and practically alone. Each was left to his own devices and had to cope with such a mass. 2 battalions of the Russian Rifle Regiment broke through the section of the 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion and were already at our defensive positions, threatening to break through the entire front. 2 Russian rifle regiments attacked the central part of the battalion's defenses and were also close to breaking through. A counterattack on the section of the 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion had to be carried out immediately. But at that moment, there was no one on hand to carry out this urgent task. Soviet troops attacked across the entire front with fierce intensity, threatening to overwhelm the handful of soldiers lying behind their machine guns. The Russian assault was like a tidal wave rushing from the Caucasus and crashing against the steep banks of the Don, losing its force there. The first rays of sunlight breaking through the thick clouds illuminated a terrible scene. As far as the eye could see, the Don and its tributaries were dotted with dark spots, some of which moved with great difficulty, while others were gradually covered by snow. The Soviet attack was repelled with heavy losses across the entire front. However, thousands of Soviet soldiers lay down and waited for nightfall. Horses without riders galloped south, their piercing neighs sounding like a death knell. The enemy forces that broke through the section of the 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion were swept away by our immediate counterattack. 6 officers and 396 soldiers of the Red Army were taken prisoner. In this sector alone, 310 Russian soldiers were killed. According to the prisoners' testimony, the attack was intended to cut off Rostov from the west. The attacks continued unabated on November 26th and 27th, despite heavy losses. It was a mystery to us how people could so willingly allow themselves to be led to slaughter like lambs to the slaughter. Despite the masses of dead and mutilated bodies lying motionless on the ice, new Russian formations joined the battle and rushed toward death. The Russian attack on November 27th began at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with artillery preparation and a barrage of fire from guns of all calibers, especially rocket artillery. But even this last attack in the area of operations of the 1st Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion was repelled by 8 o'clock in the evening. Individual enemy units broke through to the company's positions and were blocked. A counterattack was planned for November 28th. The battalion's losses were heavy and affected both non-commissioned officers and officers. Battalion Adjutant SS Obersturmführer Weiser took command of the 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion. SS Obersturmführer Olbutter was wounded again. The last attack against the 2nd Company of the 1st SS Reconnaissance Battalion fell mostly on the left flank and was repelled with terrible losses for the Russians. The attacking Russian unit was formed in June in Krasnodar as an infantry division and was first deployed in battle here. The battalion that attacked our left flank had more than 500 personnel at the start of the assault. In the attack across the Don, 135 soldiers from this battalion were killed, and more than 100 wounded were taken prisoner. Another 37 who were captured by us were unharmed. The enormous merits of our unit can only be truly appreciated by those who have experienced the paralyzing effect of the severe cold and the psychological strain of endless fighting. I saw soldiers lying behind their machine guns with tears of despair rolling down their faces as their hands flashed, changing one machine gun belt after another, and again, bullets rained down on the attacking masses. Olbutter, acting as company commander, led his motorcyclists into a counterattack without boots. They had been cut off their feet shortly before the attack. Both of his legs were severely frostbitten. In this battle, every fighter was a winner. Relying entirely on their own strength, every second soldier was lying behind a machine gun, fighting the hardest battle of their lives without guidance, orders, or other actions from their superiors. The wounded were bandaged, as best they could in such severe cold, and transported by truck to Taganrog. The heart-wrenching cries of our wounded soldiers, who were in unbearable pain, were harder to bear than the most terrible attack. Since we understood that our daily losses would not allow us to defend ourselves successfully for long, we could only guess where our front would collapse. The fighting continued even after dark. The area in front of the positions of the 1st Company of the 1st SS Battalion was cleared of the enemy with the help of several assault guns, and by 9 o'clock in the morning, the breakthrough had been eliminated. More than 300 dead remained lying on the approaches to the positions. The prisoners dragged their wounded comrades with them. But even after this costly battle for the Soviet troops, they continued to attack. Only at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon did the enemy retreat 3 kilometers, but they constantly intensified their artillery fire. The fighting on other sections of the front took place under similar conditions and seriously weakened the German defenses. The danger of a breakthrough anywhere on the front around Rostov could not be ignored, and the command headquarters of the 1st Tank Army understood this perfectly well. We were all unanimous that the front line should be shortened if we wanted to prevent a catastrophe that, under the circumstances, could lead to the collapse of the entire front. We had no reserves left. The steppe was empty. Only deep snowdrifts and telegraph poles broke the monotony of the snowy expanses. The best option for defense would be the line along the Meuse River to the west of us. Only there could we hope to stop the vastly superior Russian forces and prevent a breakthrough of the front. Some time ago, advance guard posts were sent out to establish points of departure in the rear. Any retreat had to have the defensive positions on the Meuse River as its final destination. They had to be occupied by all personnel, down to the last soldier. A further retreat across the snow-covered steppe would have resulted in unimaginable losses in manpower and equipment. While the heavy fighting on the Don had subsided somewhat, and the Soviet attacks had been repelled with heavy losses, the superior Russian forces resumed their attacks on the 60th Motorized Division and broke through the weak German front northeast of Rostov. The Russians also broke through on a broad front, crushing the left flank of the 1st Tank Army. The front faltered. At this time, heavy, stubborn fighting continued along almost the entire Soviet-German front, all the way to Leningrad. The German army in the east could no longer successfully resist such an enormous, superior force as the Red Army. The freezing cold, completely unsuitable clothing, and terrible losses, as well as insufficient replenishment of personnel and combat equipment, made successful operations simply impossible. We were fighting for our own lives. In the afternoon, the 3rd Motorized Corps was ordered to leave Rostov and retreat to a pre-prepared defensive line on the Meuse River. In fierce fighting, the Leibstandarte Division managed to leave Rostov on November 29th, retreat without heavy losses, and, with the support of the 13th Panzer Division, by the end of December 2nd, secure prepared defensive positions on the Meuse River. I participated in the retreat together with the division headquarters. We were delighted with the order to withdraw from the city and reduce the front. This decision prevented a possible catastrophe. Therefore, the order from the Führer's headquarters not to evacuate Rostov under any circumstances and to defend the captured positions to the last bullet came as a bolt from the blue for us. It was impossible to carry out this order. It showed in the most terrible way that the seriousness of the situation at the front had not been properly assessed. At that very moment, our troops were marching in the darkness of the night, barely able to stand on their feet from the cold. Deep snowdrifts, a bitter east wind, and a feeling of utter isolation made the German soldiers' lives a torture. How could such an order have been issued? It was a mystery to me. The order was ignored, and the retreat to the Meuse continued. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, General von Mackensen, and others deserved the gratitude of the military units. With their decision to continue the retreat, they saved the lives of many soldiers and prevented the collapse of the Army Group South front. It should also be mentioned that Sepp Dietrich condemned the Führer's fanatical order in the strongest terms and defended the decision of the Army Group South Command to retreat the 3rd Motorized Corps as the only possible option. I think I am right in saying that he clearly sided with Field Marshal von Rundstedt in that difficult hour. However, Field Marshal von Rundstedt was nevertheless removed from command of Army Group South and replaced by Field Marshal von Reichenau. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you all soon.